Gabriel. Okay, now we're
Great.
recording. So I will share.
Mm.
I guess you checked the website of the group.
Yeah.
I also have some noise coming in now. So so we have been since the pandemic we have been discussing about ideas around systems, complex systems, and evolution and creativity and the relationship between creation and like logic, let's say, like the logic of art or of creation. So we also have discussed about cognition a lot. So we are in this, let's say, business of the new ideas around systems, around like emergence, we could say, um, and all the possible applications. So our research, the students here like Gabriel, Matthew, Jorge, I will say Daniela, who just arrived to the meeting. She's in Chile as well. And the students are all doing PhDs or master's thesis in completely different topics like engineering, urban science, evolutionary biology, whatever. But they know this is like the core of ideas they want to explore. And most of us also have like I will say everybody, but we haven't discussed this like completely explicitly. But most of us also have like a very important, lots of concerns with the way where the world is going. So there are these scientific and deep questions, but also we care about the history of the world and the crises that are coming and how this way of thinking can help to the future challenges. So this is maybe, I guess, what make your profile completely interesting and aligned to what we do. So I will now, just after this little kind of connection, to prepare the ground for you to take over and give your seminar, which we expect it to be like 30-35 minutes maybe, and we can have a discussion session after. You can extend a little longer if needed, so no worries. Okay, so I'll mute myself now and the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, it's very nice also because it's very nice also to know you through the seminar, because usually when I do seminars, it's almost usually it's like, it's more like one-to-one interaction and not like actually understanding what you're doing. So I would be actually very interested just rather than just searching for the website to also learn more what you're doing. But maybe we can discuss it in the discussions afterwards. And yeah, I maybe I can start sharing, and then afterwards I will also present myself through that, because then it will be actually visual and easier. And let me just start showing that. And yeah, I hope you will see that very soon. So yeah, so I will start indeed with introducing myself, who I am. I am, and it's loading. So I'm researcher. I'm from Russia, unfortunately, because yeah, I left Russia 10 years ago, and originally I'm a mathematician by training. I did my PhD in Humboldt University. Um, I did it in theoretical physics, and it was actually on representing some very complex systems, such as climate, actually, as a simplified object, such as networks. So some kind of like, you take some complex system, like a city or dynamic out of equilibrium dynamical systems, and then you represent it as a bit less kind of complex object, less complex in the sense that it's like reduced object, and then you can learn from that. And I'm research fellow at LPI or CLEA, it's Center of Research and Interdisciplinarity in Paris, also part of Bell Labs and Strielka before it was shut down because of the war. And I also co-founded several kind of more distributed. That's why it spoke to me also when Thomas, you mentioned that he was very distributed. We started to do this kind of seminars where we share with urbanists primarily and the architects their approaches to studying complex systems, because they deal with that every day. And we started to organize a lot of kind of research seminars where we tried to also bridge together our more analytics, right, aspects, and they come with their embodiment practices and limitations, and okay, you can't do that because just don't have resources, and like just deal with that. And yeah, so these are people with whom I work, collaborate, some of my students, and some of the institutions with whom I work. And actually, after my PhD, I moved to Paris, where I did some postdocs, and then I work more as a now, right, as a transdisciplinary researcher, how I like to present myself on different types of projects, starting from random walks theory, because that's a beautiful mathematical theory which I really like to develop methods on, and finishing with very actually top-down and embodied practices working on participatory approaches on citizen science projects, which also extended to actually also innovation in science and studying evolution of science. And we also do have the network seminar. I hope that we can also maybe exchange afterwards about that and some events coming. So we can talk about that. So, and maybe some of the projects on which I have been working on before, it's something which are the participatory projects. And biodiversity projects are particular kind of projects which I work on and collaborated with Sony Labs and with different institutions. And they are the main part of my talk, actually. It will be on that. I also work on and really try to build more projects on humanitarian response, not actually going and, you know, helping people, like, you know, moving boxes, but actually trying to organize it, because it's actually quite hard to interact in a times of crisis, which you mentioned, right, Thomas, also, that it's actually hard because if we are not prepared for that, we're already late, right? And in some sense, we do then some participatory modeling approaches, including some development of participatory modeling and co-production workshops, what they call. That's what we work on with Vietnam and France. I may not have time enough to talk about that. And finally, of course, also big part of these projects which I work on are also on cities modeling and understanding. That's also one of the projects was actually about Belgian train networks. And yeah, so some of these projects actually started with a real world motivation, like humanitarian response, where we're modeling how, for example, cities react when there is interruption, such as crisis of, and for example, some roads are blocked. What will happen with the city when it will be like not so much, not bigger? So that was some kind of one part of it. And there was also another one which I mentioned, right, which was more on the cities structure and transport modeling, where we, for example, studied how transportation system develops over time. And because transportation system can be modeled as a network is quite mathematically pleasant object to work with, such as, for example, studying topology and mapping this topology in the phase space. So, for example, studying how the topology of objects works and develops in time. So that was also a big part of my projects, which I have been working on. And these are related also to actually another non-urban projects, which I also worked on, which is related towards understanding also of how scientific landscape works and how it is organized. So, for example, studying such objects, such as actually virtual knowledge mapping. For example, now, right, with this, all the people talking about this new AI thingies, right, how language models can actually help us to understand how, for example, innovation and science works. That was also one of our current project. With our postdoc, we have analyzed how archive data can be mapped and how it can be with reduction techniques and with embedding methods, how it can be assessed, because knowledge is exponentially expanding, right? Not maybe as our cities as fast, but like knowledge is expanding. So how we can assess and actually make a meaning out of that. And yeah, as I mentioned, that I will not have time to talk about that. But I will have time, and I would like to actually focus today a bit more on a specific aspect of the projects which I have had the luck to start to work on from 2020, from the COVID years, when everyone was locked in their home, and there was this kind of very big need sensed in the world of people realizing, okay, now that we sit, we actually maybe we can do something. And even if I am computer scientist, right, or theoretical physicist, maybe I can make sense out of this all this data which is collected, which is citizen science data. So I just wanted to make sure people familiar here with citizen science aspects or participatory projects, let's say, because it's a bigger framework, I would say. Is everyone familiar with the concept?
I think it wouldn't harm a 2 minute description.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, because actually, citizen science, as people quite like to discuss and describe it, it's something which is basically science done by citizens. So you don't have to have PhD to do that, right? Or you don't have to be involved in doing doing PhD in that. And examples of citizen science, it includes, for example, mapping, right? So we all know and we use a lot of data from OpenStreetMaps, and typically, for example, examples when people contribute to mapping, right? So that because we all know that all maps are wrong because all they are outdated, right? And for example, when I travel or go to India, every time I'm finding out that it is wrong, right? Because just people didn't map it. So because not because it's kind of bad map, right? But it's outdated. So one way to deal with that, it's actually to ask people to crowdsource and to contribute to that. And this concept of citizens as observers and citizens as contributors has been already discussed a long time ago. And actually, yeah, like for example, here also some examples also include like cholera mapping, right, like in London, where people actually mapped and understood based on this mapping where, for example, diseases can come from. And some people they map pollution, air pollution, and then they can actually make and publish their research on that just without having even like for example research group. So it's kind of like rescaled, rethought science. But when you hear that, right, that it's kind of rescaled science, immediate question arises: how it's organized? Because if we want to understand and use that, and we know that there is a big potential of big data coming from different people all around the globe who want to participate and who want to contribute to some science and knowledge, what they call co-production in the geography science right now, then it's always immediately arises a question how it is organized, how it should be organized, and whether it should be organized, right? Maybe it's actually good when it's not organized, and in which cases. So that these are all kind of big questions. And the also yet another question, which also is kind of, I would say, even more important, is how to use citizen science data in a meaningful way, because you actually always can kind of, use it in a flat earth kind of way, right? Or like, behind the curve, when people try to make conspiracy theories out of the data which they collect, right? So how to introduce peer review, for example, systems for all these projects. And one of them, right, one of these big questions, which specifically interesting for me because I'm very interested and deeply kind of involved in some urban design projects, is actually how cities can contribute, how the cities can be contributed, how people can contribute to cities' collective intelligence, how they can make sense out of existing databases on participatory projects, and how they can actually create, right, and gather meaningful experiences out of the data which is collected. Because quite often, right now, in these times when everyone can collect and accumulate a lot of data, it's very hard to understand, okay, what you're gonna do with that right afterwards. Is it actually meaningful? Okay, I will contribute to something, which is, for example, collecting some observations or making some people to understand, for example, how cities are organized, but in fact, will it be actually useful, right, in a sense, for anyone? So that's all big questions. And I'm spending time here on these things because actually it's quite important, because I didn't want to rush into the topic of citizen science projects, because it's kind of important to actually really explain why we are doing that. And some of the projects are organized in such a way, right, that there is some kind of data, that there is this kind of big box of data, which is can be gathered data of, for example, biodiversity in cities or organization, or it can be data from air pollution, or it can be data on well-being. And then you try to make sense out of this, apply some algorithms to that. And then afterwards, ideally, but that's ideally, you also want to bring it back to the community. And this comes actually to this very important cycle, which I took from the papers also from Eitzel and Hackley, Muti Hackley, who works on that in the UK, because in the UK, actually, typically it's quite also organized. I wonder how to organize, for example, in other countries, like, for example, in South America, where I really liked to work also, and I worked some time in Uruguay, and I do know that there are a lot of projects there as well, but everywhere it's very differently. But there are some common schemes on how it is structured and how it's organized, and they are kind of organized in this way that there is kind of meetings and discussions on what we're going to do. Then there is free prior involvement, and there are, like, people try to make sense, okay, what we have to collect, because there are a lot of data categorization, what they call in indigenous knowledge collection also. Then there is this phase of methodology discussions. What is fair methods to use? Are they transparent? How are we going to apply them? Then analysis, and then there can be also participatory modeling, which is yet another phase, right, which can come almost like in the analysis phase, which is on visualization of data which is collected, and making people who are involved in data collection, for example, all those thousands and hundreds of citizens, to get involved into this participatory modeling approach, in the modeling approach. So, researchers, we all build models, right, epidemic spreading model and all that. And so it's very important to understand that. You see my screen, right? It's all okay, right?
No, not
No,
anymore.
we lose.
No? Yeah,
No.
okay, yes,
It
because
was
I think,
just 1 second ago changed.
yeah, it's yeah, I will reshare it. Maybe it's good, because then it's almost like not too overwhelming. But stop me if you have any questions, okay? Yeah, and so basically one of the research questions and a case study, because I wanted to understand this, right? This kind of rescaled science, right? It's kind of rescaled in a sense, because that's kind of access to participation is scientific knowledge production process. It was quite overwhelming for me to understand that, oh, that exists, after, right, doing this kind of strict, more like, closed club community of researchers. Then you understand that no, everyone can contribute, and there are a lot of people, right? In 2021 there were already already 8 million people who are participating, and they are contributing regularly into these forms of science. So there was kind of already started to be quite some solid data that identifies. Okay, so I understand
We
now
don't we
that,
don't see
yeah,
the
you don't see the screen again, right? I think
not
it's
yet,
every time,
not yet.
but
Up
okay.
now. I think it's coming. It's kind of
Yeah, I
shifting
think that
towards the screen, and it's in black. Yeah.
you see it, right? I think it was comes in or comes out, I think that it disappears. So it's maybe on that note also that it disappears. But yeah, and so the question was on the organization of these large and small scale projects, and one point to start for me was to map and to understand how different communities are organized, which are already existing, such as Wikipedia or OpenStreetMaps, which are already all known communities, right? So you know by the number of contributions and intensity of contributions, or the number of online contributions, right? Because some of them are typically very online, like you don't have to meet anyone, but you can also sometimes meet some people, like in OpenStreetMaps for mapping changes. But there is yet another community which is called iNaturalist. Maybe you heard about it, which is this community which is more of extreme citizen science community, what they call, where it's not just about action and collection of the data or about visualization, or it's also about data collection and classification basic. So it includes all different phases of research, in a sense that people who are part of this big community, they are participating in this larger framework of people coming and doing research together with observers. So the way how it works in this community, that in this community you can either participate as a lightweight, so individual contribution. You can just take. Ah, really? The screen? I can see the screen. It's strange. That's
Yeah,
strange.
I was
Yeah,
following your words, but maybe we can make a little kind of experiment until we get it working again.
Or
Because
maybe I am the
if it's
only
very
one.
needed, if we need a lot the image, maybe we should make it work.
wait,
I was following
wait.
your voice and kind of getting the sense of it. But yeah, your
Ah,
screen is
okay, okay.
black.
Let me re-enter with my
Yeah, maybe you can
computer, so that
reload. Yeah,
I will re-enter, because I think that then I will actually have
yeah.
possibility to share it again.
Okay.
Hmm.
And yeah, so basically the main idea for this research was that there is this big community which is not so known, right? But it's already so now you see the screen, right?
Yeah, yeah. Now it's back.
Now it's back. Okay, perfect. So the main thing is that there are two types of different contributions which are possible on this iNaturalist community, which I mentioned to you. And in this iNaturalist community, you basically can observe nature. And there can be different types of contributions in this community. You can just individually contribute. You can just collect individually what is around you, and you can do it with your app. I do it every day somewhere where I am. And it's almost like, like these bird watchers crazy communities, right, where they fly over Atlantic to actually see one bird and then fly back, right? And then there is also heavyweight community contributors, where people actually collectively contribute, or organized community, where actually it's very present in Wikipedia, you probably know, right? Because it's actually very self-managed, organized, these big groups. And me, I will primarily talk actually more on analysis of lightweight contributions, but we can also talk more later about the heavyweight contributors, because actually people who are more and working with social scientists, I learn a lot that actually it's very important to understand both how they interact, because it comes out that interaction and combination of both is very important, because you can't do it just with one and you can't do just with another. And these citizen science communities of volunteers, what is important is that they actually really go and map some nature observations, but just by mapping is not enough. Just mapping is not enough, because sometimes you can be wrong, right? And then if nobody will trust your data, right, then there is no meaning on the data and collection of this material. So people actually need to verify the data. So the whole data which we work with, it consists of different observations And then there are identifications. So people put their information about who identified it. And then you also have the timestamp. And the interesting thing is that because it's so simply organized, right, you also can make a sense out of how community interact on daily basis regularly. And there are some events which are organized, large scale events, and interestingly that nobody is paid for that, right? It's very something voluntarily and which you do because you actually want to do that, right? So it's kind of this hybrid volunteer based community. And when you see that, when you hear that, the first thing which comes to your mind is whether what they call in complex systems, right? You talked a lot also that you'll work with that, and of course you're familiar with this kind of Pareto rule, right? Which is about contributions in different complex systems being non-equally distributed. And this non-equality produces the sense of actually not that everyone is non-equal, but it actually gives a sense that people also need to be somehow, there is a meaning, there is a structure behind it. And so if you actually look into how much of their all contributions are made, for example, if we look into the data which we collected from different cities and people contributing to this community from different cities, that actually the 20%, 80% of observations, they actually will not be made, they will be made by actually few percentage of people. So, and that's actually quite it's quite important to know that actually if you have a very few people who contribute, then you would actually naturally believe that these people are those people who are the most important ones, right? The key contributors with, for example, key number of observations. Actually, that is something which was at the end, it was actually really not the case because
Well,
sometimes, yeah.
ah, I think we lost you for like 5 seconds, but
Oh,
it's
really?
okay.
Okay.
Or
But
maybe
do
I
you?
was gone. I don't know if I was gone or you. But yeah,
Okay.
we
Yeah.
were hearing about the Pareto law, and I was curious to know what was the conclusion of it. Are they the most important or what?
Yes,
This is what
that's
I missed.
so. Yeah, so that's actually very good question. Is the importance of contributors, because importance of contributors is not necessarily identified, and in open source communities this is also the case, that sometimes some people who contribute the most, right, the quality is not the key but the quantity, because sometimes people can contribute very few things but they can identify very important things. For example, they can verify
Yeah, yeah,
something. So that's why this very kind of data analysis style graphs, they were not satisfactory for us. That's why we wanted to go further, and we wanted to actually go into the understanding how the community was formed, first of all. And for that, one can always look into the participation in time, first of all, because, if people contribute non-equally, for example, we know that there is around 80% of observations which is made by 20% of people, more or less, then there is kind of something which makes sense, that we can start to understand that actually the community arrived to that sense. So there is some of these super users which are organized in such a way that you have this non-equality which have been observed there. But apparently the problem was that in order to understand that, it was not very easy to look at the averaged cumulative distribution graphs of, okay, number of average observations per user, or number of users, which was somehow growing despite the COVID. So we actually thought that maybe if we will map this community, it will help us to understand how the community will or was organized. And we tried different methods for doing that. And it was actually also very interesting because Lost me again, right? I'm sorry for that. I really don't know why it's happening, but for some reason it's a bit weird here.
It's okay. We follow,
Yeah.
but we stay at the spatial patterns that you were like trying to source the importance of or the structure of contributions from the spatial patterns, and that's where we got kind of that's where we stopped hearing.
Yeah, that's where you stopped. Yes. And now I'm trying to reshare the screen. Which you don't see that right yet right now. And
We see your screen, not anymore.
not anymore. Okay, but you were seeing that. Yes. Okay, very good. So for that
Now we
one,
see your screen.
now you see that. Okay, perfect. And these spatial patterns, one important part on that was that actually these spatial patterns were not really telling us what was the core at the community formation, because we could just see, obviously we could just see the mapping of people who were contributing. And so that's why it brought us to the question of whether some participations and people, yeah, maybe I could switch off. Yes, that's true. Yes. So that's why some people could actually make different contributions. So we actually identified several groups of people inside this community, so that that would be actually the more easy to understand whether there are general contributors who are people who are contributing a lot, and then there would be also identifiers and observers who would contribute just with observations and identification. It's kind of like a separation of labor, what they call in the literature. And this separation of labor, it's also very natural for communities. So then on top of that, because community is inside each of the communities, there are interactions. We also mapped interactions, and we mapped them in such a way that people could actually make sure that some of the connections between different parts and groups of people, or groups of this community, you would actually highlight some of the contributors by the making the link. So for example, if you observe, Thomas, something in Chile, right, and then somebody who is in Belgium would actually say, oh, I know that this bird is this, right? So there is a link of this. And it's very important, because one of the biggest issues in this crowdsourced data is the data quality, because by identifying, you verify the data, you verify that this is okay, this is not like finding a white bear somewhere in the middle of Africa, right? And so some observations were that there was a very, very big, large variance in how connected and how central some users were in the network, similar to other social networks. That was something which was kind of a confirmation of the studies which were found also in other social networks, that that people have formed these communities, and organization of communities are, it's a very important kind of natural phenomena. Not that it's unsurprising, but it's important confirmation that this kind of community is sort of a community, even though nobody really knows each other. Then there was a high activity users with many observations and identifications. Then we were actually afterwards building different types of networks. We were doing that with bipartite networks and projections. So you had, for example, observations and identifications of users, so that actually those networks would be built and formed and analyzed afterwards. And then filtering out these networks, you would actually understand what and how the topology of the core of the community is and how it is organized. So that all also led us to the questions of whether, by understanding the patterns of changes of how community patterns are changing over time. So that was actually one of the main additional study which we which we are continuing right now, is to understand how community is changing in time, because the patterns say that actually people don't stay all the time the same type. They don't make the same contributions in from one year to another, and they are changing. And this is something which we are now doing with this kind of more dynamical system approach of mapping this community evolution in time. And so this all comes us back, because I know that I'm aware of time. I want to leave some time. I leave some time for questions. That there are different types of contributions, as we remember that there were some kind of lightweight and heavyweight contributions, and the lightweight and individual contributions, they can be more presented, right, as a separate contributions, and people just map, right, something which is around. But there are those heavyweight contributors who are not just organizers of community. There are people who are identifying, and they are people who are making links between each other. And typically in this community, these are the most important key nodes, which is something which we have also identified in our study, that those nodes which were people who were identifying this data, right, mapping the data, that was the key also centrality of, they had also key centrality in our network. And maybe then the last but not least, also one important kind of also result was this kind of distribution of different low activity observers, identifiers, and high activity users in different network measures for that, because actually it also comes out that network measures are differently structured for low activity and, for example, for high activity users, because obviously those users who are high and low activity, they are not having the same position in a network. So this all is a result for understanding of dynamics of our community, and also understanding how this could be used further to empower and to build more sustainable one, for making people not to leave. Like, for example, it's normal that people leave, but also that actually the community could continue living, because if we are noticing too late that there are some indicators which are falling apart, right? And this is very hard to actually find the right indicators. I just showed you some of them, but there are much more, and it's very hard to look at the networks. That's why we're actually combining them in different ways to actually understand whether, for example, one indicator, such as, for example, average degree, is typically not really a good indicator because it's very biased, it's very linear. But the average between a centrality, it's a bit better because it's actually much more stable, and it comes more towards analysis of how connected and how how distributed the community is. So that's one of the things of the take-home message, which is more that we believe that these results could be useful to the project managers of these communities, to also, of course, be digested with them, not to come and to transfer it to community without like a PowerPoint presentation, but actually one needs to boil it down to more deeper and simpler understanding. And then we also had actually meetings with the community. So we actually made a full cycle where we discussed also how these results could be implemented in the recommender system for the citizen science projects, when we could understand that sense kind of making that more kind of actually sense of a community, because it's not always the case. So yeah, and for this I will probably finish. Thank you so much. I hope that it was not too long, and yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I was just willing to clap, but I pressed the wrong button. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I want
Because
to send this. Yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
wow. Um, I am really really excited about what you just presented, your talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wonder if there are questions. If not, I will take over. But I want, I hope, I imagine that everybody has some,
Mhm.
maybe some people have some questions, but this is very, very exciting. Um,
Yeah,
Thank you.
I
so
completely
go ahead.
agree.
Maybe, yeah, let me, I will kind of, just for organizing this, I will kind of give words. So guys, raise your hand and I will kind of say, okay, you, next you. So Matthew, please start. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I thought it was a great talk. I unfortunately missed like 10 minutes of it because I had to run. I lost Wi-Fi at the cafe, so I had to run back to my place. So I missed like 10 minutes, but yeah, I thought it was dealing with a lot of the things that I'm kind of trying to figure out myself. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is how complexity science is being applied to urban studies. I feel like it's mostly being applied in this spatial way. So, like, measuring complexity is really kind of understood in these spatial terms. Like, so the main thing the main framework or the agency that citizens are being understood as are through these like spatial networks. And I feel like there's so much
Mm,
more that complexity can offer. For example, like with platform urbanism that you were talking about in the beginning. So I feel like these kind of connections are equally important, probably if not more important, for how like changes are happening and how complexity can be understood on an urban level. So maybe if you could talk about that, and maybe you did talk about it a little bit,
mm.
but that's kind of one thing that I'm trying to understand a little bit better. If you
Yeah,
could.
yeah, for sure. And actually, that's why I started the talk with this work by Goldchild, talking about the citizens as observers. But I actually really dislike this concept because it's actually disempowering, and it's actually brings down this sense of people actually making what they call, right, in this book on the collective intelligence by Michael Nielsen and all those community, right, of people trying to actually make sense together, right? Like in the old times, people would gather together in circles and actually try to make start to make sense and to maybe understand that we don't need to collect the data about some issues. We actually maybe need to do something else, right? So that's almost something which is missing sometimes in these citizen science approaches, which are more limited on indeed either mapping, doing spatial analysis, maybe doing some network analysis of these spatial distributed structures, right? Which is useful, but they're kind of almost like, you are looking at the elephant and you're holding its and you're like touching and you think that this is a snake, right? Because actually, like, you just hold that, and I feel like I'm just touching the nose of an elephant, right? Because it's very hard, and usually typically we arrive always at the GDPR, always that we can't then record something when we work with citizens, and it's always measuring complexity and measuring, assessing collective intelligence in a group. It's very also like learning analytics people with whom we work a bit here now in Germany as well. They have some methodologies for measuring that. So if to answer your question, Matthew, it's very hard to measure kind of people's contribution to a bigger goal, right? For example, right, achieving that, and that can be different. Maybe some people can. Yeah, yeah. I see the chat as well. Actually, yeah, yes. So I mentioned this iKnow.world, which we, with my researchers with whom I know, we were just advisors for this project, which is more, it's a Spanish kind of organization, and they try to work on this collective mapping. And it's not new. People were doing that in UN Habitat as well. People are collectively mapping, for example, problems in a circle. And that's also something which I can also send you some links. What's called, it's They have a very nice methodology in UN Habitat, which is called STDM methodology, but it's more again for communitarian response, because if we would say that we would analyze, for example, communitarian OpenStreetMaps, just as in this approach which I presented, right, we could almost measure, for example, the response to the whole crisis, right, and how people are mapping that, because actually that's also what is happening, like with Turkish earthquakes, right, that people are mapping this. But it turns out that people are leaving very fast, right? There is, of course, this contribution, and then people are leaving, so there is no sense of togetherness sometimes, right? Which is from this collective action, sometimes you just it doesn't stay. So how to make it more as a community, right? What is missing in this hybrid interactions? And
Any
yeah,
other
I can also
questions?
send you some links.
Yeah, please. Well, we will appreciate if you can send us maybe some complementary material that you comes to your mind after. We will stay in touch definitely, but for the group.
Mm-hmm.
Any other
Yeah, of
questions?
course.
No? Okay. So I want to I want to ask you a question that for our group maybe it's kind of relevant, because in complex systems or complex science, complexity science, and so on, we normally tend to identify the phenomenon, as you say, like the first reduction is with a network. So we put entities and we connect the entities through links to establish some sort of relation, like data. We're talking about the same. We talk to each other, or we are in the same geographical zone, or whatever. We create lots of links to establish connections. But there are. I mean, I I want to put this on the table to see how it will you react. Maybe there are certain things that the language of networks, we work on this. The language of networks tend to fall short. For example, some interactions are many to many, not just one to one. So or some interactions are contextual. Depending on who is around, then it will be one kind of interaction, and if some other node is around some other entity or some other condition, then the interaction will be different. So that interaction itself, we can. I'm trying to go to the fundamentals. You as a mathematician or physicist, you probably understand where I'm trying to go. Um, so this reduction of establishing links between nodes sometimes uncovers the real meat of the problem, which is at the process of how the interaction gets established. Um, Maybe for some cases, like gathering data and combining people in a certain way, as you show in some of your examples, it might make a lot of sense to remain at the level of networks, to look at what's going on. But on some other cases, especially when there are communication processes in between the agents, let's say, I will say that there are some underlying processes that are missing in the language of representation itself.
Yeah.
So we kind of deal with this thing. We propose, and for example, for ecological interactions, just to you want to complement with this, Matthew?
After you finish, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Because I thought you would provide an example. But for example, in ecological interactions, we normally we have made some criticisms to this problem, let's say, or analyze this situation. So you get typically the ecological interactions like positive on one side or negative on the other side, and then it's depredation or parasitism or blah blah blah. But then this idea that in the presence of another node or another environmental condition, something that is maybe depredation can become competition or can even become mutualism. So the interactions are established through, let's say, mechanisms or processes. So when we put, or when we want to represent our system starting from a network from scratch, we are missing all that implicitly. So we propose to use an alternative framework, which is the reaction networks, like Petri nets, I don't know, like reaction networks, like chemical reaction networks, and represent stuff like transformative processes, like changes in the lab. For a physicist, it will be like you get state changes by interactions. So we don't analyze the links themselves, but we analyze the pathways of changes of states that emulate what we understand as an interaction. So it is a little bit maybe more complicated to create these models, but you don't miss this level of I don't know, the establishment of the interactions that I was saying. That's this level of representation that seems to be fundamental to explain why this centrality, or why this what you observe then in the power law structures you show, they might be consequence of an underlying process. You see what I mean? And then if you
Yeah.
want to make interventions, maybe it's best to get this DNA, or let's say fundamental model of how that network structure emerges. You see? So I would like to discuss this further with you, but I just want to know, because you are an expert in citizen science, you have read a lot about this, you have done a lot about this, and I have spoken in other occasions with other people kind of also in the same area. And I, as far as I understand, this is not kind of mainstream at all, this idea, and not even kind of discussed much. So we are interested in knowing if you have heard of this kind of thinking before, or the challenges behind, and so on.
Not in a context of citizen science, mostly in context. I will just quickly reply to that before you say. Not in the context of citizen science, most in context of actual open source projects. For example, there is a group in Berlin working on that by Henri Sarman in Berlin. Or there are people working on open source projects, analysis, distributed science. Like we worked on archive, for example, analysis specifically for that, for example, because an archive, it's almost like collective intelligence, like people, putting their research. And there are so many discussions which you're having on how to represent this community, because neither representation is right, and all representations are wrong, but some are useful, right? And so in a way, if we are aware of these limitations, like for example, some time ago we were working on these climate networks when we were representing climate as a network, and there were really a lot of climatologists which really were like, oh, we'll never publish your work. And they were right in a sense of like danger of such approaches, because if people blindly use them, will not be able to do that. And I answer your final questions that I haven't heard, and I would like to know if you could send me on this reaction networks, for example, of community. That would be great to know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please, Matthew. And I just say definitely, yeah, we stay in touch, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's so many points to expand upon kind of in relation to this conversation. And the ones that I've kind of been thinking about recently, especially as Tomas mentioned with like reaction networks. And what I'm kind of trying to understand better is how, like typically in city modeling, like one citizen is like one agent or part of like one network. But I think it's really important to think about how one citizen agent is a part of so many different systems, or can have many different types of agency. And those systems aren't necessarily connected to like the city. And it's like they shouldn't necessarily be contextualized under the city. Like I think I'm really trying to figure out whether or not a city itself could be understood as a complex system, because you could just as easily map these networks under like the financial processes or the financial systems that are happening. And I think that's especially true with platforms too. So I think whether or not you even look at the city as a complex system is an important thing to consider. And especially with the citizens, like what the kind of understanding agency between the citizens and the city, if the city has any kind of agency in itself too.
Okay. So you mean even going beyond that? Okay. Yeah, I first thought about the Jeffrey West approach, right? Like Santa Fe crowd people, but I know that they were continuing on deepening that and not just considering that as just, bunch of edges, and not just even as a multiplex graph, but maybe as a hyperlink graph, right? Or going even further, because that's a very weird and very, yeah, the thing is that probably it's very important to identify the scale here, because if indeed we go and we say that we are analyzing, indeed, I started right with the city collective intelligence, but actually wanted to boil it down to a very specific community, because there you're right, some agents are still missing, and actually that's what they do in what they call actor resources network mapping for crocodile mapping in South Africa. They really try to do and to map agents and to map missing agents, for example. Well-being of people can be also an important link which is missing, and it's a big confounder. So thank you for bringing that. Yeah, I can also send you some link on that.
Yeah, in this respect, just to complement a little bit on what Matthew is doing, because we are, just to contextualize Liubov, because we didn't have the chance to really talk beforehand. Now we are maybe in this kind of shake hands moment. We are from like the school of Brussels. We will say we are all distributed, but we belong to this center Leo Apostel, which is a center for transdisciplinary studies that comes from like the 90s. And it was founded by a philosopher. And they were, at that time, there was these concerns of like globalization, and the idea was to think of the world, like the world's knowledge, let's say, as a fragmented, let's say, jar, something like it's completely fragmented. Every culture, every group has its own way to think, to conceive their own epistemology or their own even like beliefs or paradigms. And now we are in this era of getting close to communicate further and further, and now we are going to clash. So all these worldviews will clash, and we need to prepare for that. So that's how kind of like the center start, to prepare philosophically the world for the integration of worldviews. And there were like scientists coming from different fields, like, for example, philosophy, linguistics, and also complex systems, and even theoretical physics. Actually, one of the former director was present here. He left, probably, I think he got a call or something. And the current director, he developed this idea of called relational agency, which is a sort of ontology for complex systems, a new kind of ontology for complex systems, which is based on these processes I was telling you. So then agency is actually an emergent property of interactions, of kind of more fundamental distinctions, or whatever you can measure or distinguish. It's a fundamental observable entity or unit, not necessarily with agency, but then you can see up these patterns of interactions that when they reach certain structural properties, you can call them as having agency. And that's what really should be the node, because we tend, with the network theories and with all these Santa Fe, let's say, approaches and so on, which are amazing. I did you do the Santa Fe summer school? You look like someone who did it.
I did the one which is winter summer school. We did it in Poland. We were doing this WWCS, what they call it.
Yeah. I also did it. So I think we kind of, we recognize each other. So that there is this alternative way of looking at agency and going back to questions that are like really fundamental in, for example, emergence of life, how first living agents came up from, like kind of chemistry, how biology came out of chemistry. And these foundational questions of emergence, let's say, are more central to our group than the very idea of using complex systems theory to 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 model something or to represent something. We are kind of like more into the foundational questions of what complex systems really are, that's why I came up with this question. That's why also Matthew has this view. I mean, we all get attracted to these kind of foundations of what are we doing. So this is just to tell you a little bit kind of like what's maybe our common landscape of ideas. And that's why we talk equally about cognition, about creativity, about relationship between art and science, or biology or life or AI. So it's we are all like mixed up with these topics, because what we care the most, it's this more emergence of agency, of autonomy. These questions are for us like the most nowadays the most fundamental, and most of our work at the moment is funded by a grant that is called Origins of Goal Directedness. So how
Wow.
goal directedness emerges from like just pure interactions. And actually that's why I'm very interested personally to discuss further with you, and kind of exchange a little bit, or
Mm,
maybe give a seminar at your group or something, so we can
yeah,
like kind of establish a sort of bond that maybe, because I think we can collaborate on this. Um,
yeah. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
and
Because actually now, right now, I'm at the workshop actually right now here where we invited psychologists, cognitive psychologists from Switzerland, from Swiss
mhm,
group from neurosystemics, where they actually study how in relations people there is this kind of relational agency which is appearing. So that, but they study that from actually
from
psychological sides, right? Because without that, it's very hard to form groups.
yeah, from
And
from you mean from neural data, from kind of like brain
so actually from
data?
not even neural data, but more from people telling how during the process of group work,
Ah, okay,
how
okay.
there start to be appearing sense of group,
Yeah,
sense of emergence of something, right? When the group is starts to be a group, right? Because
yeah,
actually sometimes it's just a group, right? Like, just like
yeah.
random set of group. Is it a group, right? When it starts to be appearing, and there is this kind of methodology. There are many methodology, psychologically grounded theories
Hmm.
of emergence of group formation,
Yeah.
which can be almost fostered, right? And it can be fostered by closeness, by geographical closeness, or it can be fostered by common crisis, right? Like people understand crisis, they start to react together. So that's why we started to work with that. But it was for me more to learn their approach, because I need to sometimes design projects with citizens.
Mm.
And as also Mathieu was mentioning, I miss so much because I don't know the background, right? I speak French, but I may not know some parts which are
Mm.
important, right? So how not to miss an elephant.
Yeah, yeah. That's the problem of the inter and transdisciplinary research, that we cannot
Oh,
know
wow.
everything. Ah, so this is who's showing this, Gabriel, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
What is that?
so this
It's
is a
a
little bit. Yeah.
yeah.
You. Yeah.
You can please Thomas about the
Okay. Yeah, let me show you very kind of very quickly the idea that we have, or the modeling idea we kind of tried to work on about this
Mm-hmm.
emergence I was telling you. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that we start from rather than having interactions between agents, we have
Mm-hmm.
state, or we call it processes of transformation. These are like chemical reactions. If you have, for example,
Mm-hmm.
the first on the left, up left, a plus b goes to a plus 2b. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something like b can grow when a is present. So a is catalyzing the self-replication of b. You can think of
Mm-hmm.
it, and this can happen for maybe for a political idea, or for if you want, or for bacteria can reproduce in the presence of something, or it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to respect the conservation of mass. Here we can discuss whether mass is conserved, what about thermodynamics and all that, but we can skip that for simplicity. And just think of these transformational processes that when some things get together, then some other things are created. Like, for example, when B and D are coming together, then C is created, and that means that B and D are destroyed. So B and D become together C, and you can, for example, this can be the typical, the compartmental models in epidemiology, like the SIR model, can be represented in this
Yeah,
way as well,
yeah, I
right?
see.
So you can do that, or you can have an ecological interaction, like B, for example. You can there is an interaction, I think is called amensalism, when one of the species get benefited by the presence of the other without harming the other. So, or commensalism, I think it's commensalism, but that was one of these ecological interactions. So, or for example, B plus C gives 2C, that reaction, like the last one before the decay reactions. You can say that one means like C depredates B. So C depredates B and can reproduce. So then you provide a list of all these reactions, and then you can look at all the subsets of the possible elements that you have there. So that's what you see this in the right, this kind of this sort of a partial order set that you see, that A, B, C, D, then A, B, A, C, B, C, blah, 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 all the subsets there, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that making some simple analysis about things produce each other, you can find these sort of loops of creation, things that have some sort of, this can be easily formalized. It's called closed and self-maintaining. So some groups of species have the ability to self-create as a group. So please go up again, Gabriel. And those things that have the chance to recreate themselves as a group through the transformational processes are the black squares here, those that are marked more like black. And then if you make a dynamical system out of that, like a differential equations, a stochastic or discrete, and in space or not in space, whatever, you will end up finding, it's very easy to prove mathematically, that those sets of entities that interact in these self-producing ways are the only groups of species, the only groups of elements that can remain in the long run dynamics. They can be the attractors. It's a covering of the attractors of the system, an abstract covering, because you don't get the specific state, but you know the region of the phase space. Actually, each of these boxes is a subspace of the phase space, where some of the stuff is present and some of the other stuff is not present. So then this is actually a view of the subsets of the phase space, and you can identify in which subsets of the phase space you might find an attractor. That's in the dynamical systems language what this theory is about. And then, yeah, you can study how a perturbation, like what if I, for example, I start from the state A there, like in the first hierarchical level A, and I bring B. Then will I go to AB, or will I go to ABC, or to ABCD? Where is it going to move in the dynamics when perturbations come? This you can analyze with the theory, and you can kind of represent these groups of state, which are like the communities from this initial transformational setting of what changes into what. The easiest way to think about this is like ecological species and interactions. Not all of them will be predation. It could be cooperation. There could be some different sorts of interactions all together. You don't need to create different links for the different interactions. All of them are represented at the same, let's say, ontological level of just transformations. Some interactions will have to be described by pathways, first this, and then that, and that, and that. And that represents the interaction, the collection of reactions. And then with this, you get a picture of what could be the possible stable states of that. And those will be your real agents. Those things that remain stable, those are the real agents, not the other things. And the interesting thing is that this agency is hierarchical, because A is contained in AB, AB is contained in ABC. So then you get like different levels of agency.
And it's something which you, just to understand the context, it's something which you designed in order to describe this emergence of agency, or was it something? I mean, you what was the context? Was it specifically for that, for
This started
emergence of
from
agency?
emergence of life. It was
Mm.
like the idea of emergence of because these things, since they are self-producing, the idea was to identify the minimal structural conditions for something to be called alive.
Oh
So
wow.
it has to be able to self-produce itself. And this is like the most abstract setting, because we don't have space, we don't have boundaries, like special boundaries here. Then you can do like a partial differential equation of this, and then see how the spatial constraints also play a role. But at the most structural level, this is just to show in a non-spatial reality what are the productive conditions for something to be able to exist in the long run. The only way that a transformational system exists in the long run is through its own self-preservation, through its own processes. So that's how language, for example, remains, because we all speak the
Yeah.
language, we keep the language alive, and we keep our consciousness alive because we think all the time. So we cover our available set of experiences over and over and over and recreate that. So we create this idea of identity. And the same happens with
Mhm.
biochemical molecules that create and recreate themselves from the, of course, there are thermodynamical constraints here that we are not discussing for biochemistry, but basically that's what it's a living system. So then we try to bring this sort of emergence of life, paradigm to describe systems in general, like ecological systems or and so on. Yeah.
Mm.
So this is
Mm.
like the framework.
Ah, okay. So now I understand what you meant by this reaction networks. Do you have something which you already kind of more, I would say, applied to some context, or where I
Yeah.
could
No,
learn from?
there are many articles. Yeah. I have lots of articles about this, but maybe
Okay,
it's
because yeah,
not
I
easy
think
to
it would be
make the
more,
connections.
it would be helpful to understand more,
Mm.
indeed, first what you did in order to understand how that could be for me applied in what I do, so that,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. So that's why I think it would be good that maybe we can give back
Yeah,
a
maybe you
seminar.
could indeed come
So
and
then,
describe it in the seminar. Indeed,
mm,
that would be the best, the easiest, I think,
yeah.
because we do that regularly also in sometimes in Zoom and being distributed.
Yeah, no, now I cannot go there to South France. I'm in Chile now, but in
Yeah,
August or later on, I could go.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, we can do it also virtually if you
yeah,
feel like
definitely.
doing that.
No, no, absolutely. I think that the best would be that we do this virtually for now, and then maybe in summer we could.
Mm.
This is the work of some people in Germany that they did a model of political systems. So these
Aha.
molecules. Do you know Luhmann? Luhmann, the
No.
sociologist. So Luhmann is a sociologist that created a sort of alternative school based on the idea that social systems are not people, are communications. So the social systems and
Mm.
everything, it's just a system of
Ah, yeah.
communications, and people are just mere like the medium, and the social system really is the communications that this human medium transmits. So we are like transmit, like I don't know, like the social tones, like photons. We are like social tones, we just transmit the thing, we are
Yeah.
not the thing. That's more or less like his idea. And the creators of this theory in Germany, in Jena, they did this model of like basic, just as a toy model of how a social system could organize through communications. And these different molecules mean like for example, G is physical force. Another thing is like yeah, political party members. Like they made a sort of ontology of what are the basic communications that can happen in a system. And then they made reactions. So when these social movements have a certain program, then this program will create more adepts, more social movement people. So when there are enough concerns, then the political parties will take these concerns and turn them into their policies. You know, like, so how the political system listens to the social system, to people, and adapt their needs to their own political program. So, and then you can create a sort of loop of how this thing work. And yeah, and so it's, I don't want to go into details because it's too long, but
yeah, maybe you could indeed, maybe you could present
yeah, a few examples
in
of
the coming
how,
month.
yeah.
Yeah, so that would be the best probably to
Mhm.
to continue discussions, and everyone is welcome to come
Yeah,
indeed to the seminar. I mean, like from your group, because we do that in Paris, but indeed our group is quite distributed, and it's also in Germany.
So you are you based in Paris?
Yeah, I'm based currently in Paris, but I'm quite often also in the south of France because there is this psychology cognitive link with this kind of what they call relational psychology, because they do want to study the system. It's called neurosystemics. I will send you in the chat.
Very
And what they do
interesting.
is quite interesting, because they do that also for crisis response, and they don't have yet what is very interesting analytical framework for working with what they do, and they have organized really like hundreds of these sessions online with people, and they want to study that also analytically at some point to better understand, right? Not to evaluate, but to, yeah.
Very, very nice, because I think this framework could maybe
Yeah.
help. Could be of
Yeah.
help. It seems
Yeah,
to be
that's
suited
very
for this
interesting also.
emergence
We
thing.
can invite them.
Yeah. So that's on the technical side, and then on the non-technical side, I think that your experience and what you have been doing is really useful for us in the group. And we
Yeah.
also have a foundation in Chile with some of the members here. So we are interested in doing this sort of like citizen science here. So
Yeah.
maybe we can talk about that too in the future. Maybe look for some funding or something to do something like
Yeah.
that in Chile. Yeah, Gabriel is sharing the link of our foundation.
Ah, okay. So that's the one which is in Chile, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Right.
for the sake of time, I think we are past quite fast, and
Yes, that's
maybe
true. But thank you
you
so
have a lot
much.
to
It was
do.
very
We
nice
also, yeah, it was a
to
great
interact a
meeting.
bit more.
We have
And
the recording, and we will publish your seminar in
okay,
our
perfect.
channel, and we remain in touch so we can continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we will stay in touch on that. And thank you for sharing, everyone. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.